politics in the pub. All right. It's been a while waiting. January, February, March, finally. So first I'd just like to welcome to country and acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land, the Bunjalang people and all the 13 different tribes that they represent, and to offer our respect to the elders past, present and future. Tonight we're going to discuss the politics of urgency, how we can build the future now, how we can begin. We're going to look at how we can develop strategies to confront the power of corporations, which seems to be getting larger and larger, and particularly if this TPP goes through, then they'll be able to sue the government whenever they want, like they're doing in Canada and Uruguay and many other countries. And we're going to look at how we can build grassroots communities that are capable of bringing about progressive change. Now, our wonderful convener, Richard Hill, and his lovely partner, Jennifer Granger, are actually abroad, and they were very sorry about that because, of course, it's their passion, politics in the pub. So Richard has given me a very long letter to read out to you all. But it's basically just to introduce and to welcome you to the first Politics of the Pub for 2018, which could prove to be an extremely important and powerful and influential year, one that we remember in our history. And we want to reflect our intention to continue highlighting the many failings of neoliberal capitalism as it is at the moment, but more importantly to consider credible and workable alternatives for the current order of things. This is surely the time, Richard says, when the present system looks like it's collapsing and retreating into some kind of very dark corners and some of its edges. And so we want to talk about the ethics, the values, the practices and institutions we need to build to make a more peaceful, just and regenerative world. As George Monbiot suggests, we need a new politics of belonging and a revitalized sense of the commons, rather than the essentially dehumanizing and wildly destructive features of the present order. Despite all the obvious challenges, and like millions of others around the world, Ngara remains optimistic and full of engaged hope. We're committed to promoting a persuasive story about a better world that can be achieved. And that story will emerge from building respectful relationships, shared dialogue, not like the one we have with Russia at the moment, and co-creation, the building blocks of global social movement. So the 2018 Politics in the Pub series kicks off this evening, and Richard says he really wishes he could be here. But he's delighted that we have Sue and Vinay, who will share their thoughts on the politics of urgency. And we also have Mark Swivel, who will stake his claim as Mullumbimby's suggestion for alternative PM for Australia. Yeah, I think it'd be great. And go Mark, so he's going to come on first before the other main presenters. So just like to briefly tell you the other presenters that we do have for this year, because next month we have Professor Henry Reynolds, who is, many people here are in great admiration of him. He's Emeritus Professor at the University of Tasmania, and he will be talking together with Professor Stuart Rees, who we have had here before from the Sydney Peace Foundation, who's a great talker too. So that's next month. Don't miss what that one's going to be, an amazing, I would say, like tonight. We also have Dr. Michelle Maloney from the Earth Law Alliance and James Wellen from the Change Agency. Then on another month we have Shane Narayana, the Human Rights Campaign Director of Get Up, who's been going through a lot recently, if you're following. Obviously, the government's trying to stop them if they can. We also have Emeritus Professor Frank Stilwell from the University of Sydney coming. Yeah, it looks like he's got some fangs here. And we have Andrew Charlton, former Senior Economic Advisor to Prime Minister Kevin Rudd. We have Tim Hollow, Director of the Green Institute, John Quiggin, Professor of Economics at the University of Queensland, and then plus we have our very own lovable comedian Mandy Nolan and our very own local activist and Flux supporter James Wright. So just to have someone a little younger. Additionally, in July we will be holding another annual lecture, and this year it will be delivered by former Human Rights Commissioner Gillian Triggs. Yeah. So nice to have women in these high places, I think. So Professor Triggs will also present the second Australian Activist of the Year award, and we are in debate at the moment. There's quite a bit of, a few of us want this person, a few want that. So if any of you would like to suggest to any of the members of our group who you would like to support, you're most welcome. We are doing heaps of other things this year. I won't go into them now, but please look at our beautiful website, which is called ngarainstitute.org.au. If you just put in Ngara Institute in Google, you'll find it. And also watch out for the Beyond the Pub gigs to be held at the splendid local space called Wild Space, just on the main Arm Road there, lovely space. So have a great evening, and thank you all for your ongoing support. We need you. And that's from Richard. Thank you, Richard. So we have, three amazing speakers tonight, and all of them are lawyers. So how cool is that? All very smart dudes.
Not very.
I think probably really quite smart, with the exception of Mark, maybe, who's more witty than he's smart. But look, he's ready. But first, I will just briefly announce our two other speakers besides Mark. So we're very honoured to have Sue Higginson, and she's an environmentalist, a lawyer, and a campaigner. She is former CEO and principal lawyer of the Environmental Defenders Office, which represents communities fighting mining and coal seam gas proposals. Sue has even locked on to bulldozers herself. Woo! How is that? Any of us who were at Bentley will remember that. That's quite something to do that, so I take my hat off to her. She's participated in all sorts of nefarious things while protecting old-growth forests in the New South Wales North Coast, including the blockade at Chalundi State Forest, and she is one of Australia's leading environmental lawyers. And she will speak after Vinay Orekondy. Is that how you pronounce your surname? And he is the president of the Australian Progressives, also a lawyer and advocate who has campaigned on various causes, including debt relief for poor countries, great cause, human rights and international criminal law. Vinay was coordinator of an advertising boycott against media celebrity Alan Jones for comments he made in relation to the Prime Minister Julia Gillard. Vinay is also an avid grassroots and community building campaigner. And now we come to our very own Mark Spittle with his motto, think, create, deliver. Mark is our local area suggestion for alternative Prime Minister, and maybe the whole of Australia, as if they only knew, how good he was. He will bring some humour to politics if he got in, I'm sure. And tonight, also to our first Politics in the Pub event of the year. Like our two presenters, he's a lawyer and a consultant, and he's recently become the company secretary of our very own energy company, Anova. Yes, who are committed to making the transition to renewable energy. a reality. So let's have a very warm welcome. Whoa, Mullumbimby welcome for Mark Slimmel. Woo!
Thank you, Caroline. Slightly underwhelming, the initial description you gave me, but thanks anyway. Mullumbimby's suggestion. Let's turn that suggestion into a criterion inevitability, shall we, people of Mullumbimby? Thank you. And I hope with Sue and Vinay to form a troika to rival the likes of Stalin, Lenin and Trotsky, only with sort of more agreeable results. I'm sure that Julie Bishop and Grigory Logvinov are discussing that possibility right now. I look forward to the transcript. But it's tremendous to be with you, people of Australia, people of Mullumbimby here tonight. We have to take politics back. The revolution begins today. We can, together, make Australia slightly better than average again. Yes, let's hear it! Slightly better than average. Yes, thank you. I want Australia to be a country where, you know, there's always time for a chat, a bowl of laksa or pho, and possibly a game of corridor cricket. The way we're going, the only cricket that will continue to play in this country. And Alexander Nix has confirmed today to my private VPN email address that he did write Steve Smith's press conference speech. Steve wasn't capable of that, was not his own work. He's also written the silence that Darren Lehman maintains. But moving on, back to the real world, we obviously need an alternative Prime Minister. Good people of Mullumbimby, I'd quite like to see, you know, a genuine alternative, like a young woman, say from the Kimberley, with a deadly burlesque routine and a background in engineering, someone like that, a properly alternative Prime Minister. What do you think, Mullumbimby? Absolutely. Or, you know, Penny Wong could have a crack. You know, she's clearly tough enough. She's made of steel to have survived in this country. Against the odds as an Asian person, a lesbian, and coming from Adelaide. Anything is possible. Now, I think I need to share with you some ideas for an alternative, with your permission, an alternative national anthem. What do you reckon? Yeah. Okay, all right. Just bear with me. This is bound to fuck. Nima Japan gari nima walawang ne jahat pa nima gani machini yakrai ne Japan ne walang gumuchala kuchu. Come on! What's wrong with you, Mullum? Is it my Yolnu accent that you're not grasping? Nima Japan gari nima walawang ne jahat pa nima gani machini yakrai ne Japan. Okay, look, all right, it's obviously not working, I apologise, Mullum, but look, there's your homework for the week, okay, or say for, clearly you're not in tune with that, so I'll give you to the next Politics in the Pub to learn that verse in Yolnu. Have we got a deal? Yeah! Good. Write it down. Terrific, write it down, excellent. Who's keeping the minutes here tonight? This is where revolution begins. Together we can create a country slightly better than average. Now, why are we here? Why am I here? Well, a friend of mine, let's call him Saul because that's his name, keeps goading me on Facebook. You know, I post about politics from time to time, Mullumbimby, in order to prevent myself from self-harming. And I might say, for example, universal basic income seems like a good idea to me.
Yes.
Yeah? Okay.
Yes.
Companies paying tax that reflects the scale of their business seems like, and other truly obvious things. And Saul's response is, oh, Swiv, you should really give politics a crack. Swiv for PM, smash the state, smiley face. And I say to you, as I say to Saul, why the hate? It's difficult to bear that pressure. I mean, you wouldn't wish being Prime Minister on, I don't know, Andrew Bolt, Pauline Hanson, Malcolm Turnbull. I mean, you know, there's no job security, there's no weekends, there's plainly no power. It's a terrible, terrible prospect. And the only reason Turnbull's Prime Minister, clearly, is that he couldn't face the prospect of retirement. You know, kicking about his mansion all day in his dressing gown, reading Proust again, taking the kids for food court lunches. Can you see Turnbull sitting by the ball pool at IKEA? No, I can't either. You know, so we're stuck with him, and nothing says Australia quite like spending $1.75 million of your own money to get elected by a single seat. What a colossal dickhead. And then there's that other bloke, refresh my memory, name escapes me, Bill Shorten, yes, that fellow. You know, he's basically the Stephen Bradbury of Australian politics, isn't he? And I apologise for implanting the idea of Bill Shorten in Lycra in your minds. We won't sleep tonight, Mullen. You know, I'm not even sure the man has sex. Really? No, Malcolm and Lucy I can visualise in the library. There's a table involved, there's a dog watching, a Labrador, learning, taking notes, Peter Dutton in the cupboard with a ball in his mouth. Yeah, you've had the same, yeah. We're on the same page, Mullen. Excellent, thank you. Whoa, there we go. That's it, that's an old... Yes, Jackie, what's his name? Mike trick. So, you know, look, the difficulty, of course, is that I'm completely, manifestly unfit for public office. Otherwise, I'd have run before now, you know. For starters, I don't particularly like animals, especially cats. So half the electorate would notice and I'd be, you know, functionally unelectable. It's a terrible position to be in. I'm also, you know, being PM's a violent job, and I'm not a violent chap. Yeah, I mean, I do have violent impulses. You know, for example, when somebody says disinterested when they mean bored. So I don't mean to be pious, but you know, people would come into the PM's office and they'd be pitching about the submarines. You know, how we need 12 submarines and we must spend $50 billion on these submarines, right? That would happen, and I'd be like, I'm not sure, folks, if we're on the same page in respect of the military-industrial complex. You know, and it'd be like taxi for swivel. And I'd be saying, look, no, you've got to understand that, you know, when I was in the bathtub as a kid playing battleships with my sister, right, like I had 15 submarines and I couldn't even defend my end where the taps are. So, you know, it'd be very, very difficult, I think, for me to pull it off as Prime Minister. But being unfit for public office doesn't quite seem to be the obstacle it used to be. So, you know, maybe I should give it a crack. What do you think, Mullen? Give it a go? All right. Okay, well, just to give you, like, shortly I'll launch, with your permission, my 10-part plan, 10-point plan even, for creating a country worth living in. But before we get there, I should explain some of my basic ideas about politics. I mean, I believe that we've forgotten what politics is essentially about. And I don't mean to get nostalgic or sentimental, but I think politics is about government. You know, doing things in the interests of human beings. And I believe in government more than the market. I mean, what's the market? The market is basically a bunch of guys in suits hoping not to get found out. Right? And, you know, so I believe in government like I believe in cricket more than Scientology, or used to believe in cricket more than Scientology. Anyway, so that's it. And the way I look at the world, the last generation, I call it the privatizoic period, where we've sort of sold off everything we possibly can. And if the political class of all stripes had a theme song, it'd be something like this. Everything is awesome, everything is cool when you're part of a team, everything is awesome when you're selling everything off that took ages to build up. From the workers, and the taxpayers, you motherfuckers! That's it. Okay, do you think that'd work? Like with the new anthem? Yeah, we've got a package, or at least a Christmas record, sort of in production there. So, all right, well, having regard to the time and the more serious and substantial contributions you'll hear from Sue and Vinay, although I would welcome them in my party, which I don't know what you think about this. I think we should call. I think you know, Australians, we're all at each other. You know, sort of gimme, and man after midnight. We're singing the wrong song. You know, we're like sort of seagulls fighting over chips down at the beach in our politics. But we need to come together right now over me. Thank you. That's it. That's what we need. That's it. All right, okay. So without any further ado, my 10-point plan for creating a country worth living in. Point 1, responsible service of capitalism. Profits are okay, but there's got to be a limit, okay? So Rupert, blow into this bag, you're drunk, go home, okay? Enough's enough. So it's time to share the love. Okay, motion carried, right? Okay, good. 2, law enforcement. I will enforce all of the laws that already exist in relation to insider trading and other corporate malfeasance. I will do this by replacing ASIC with front office ladies from the toughest schools of the nation. Those clowns in there have had enough time, really being, wearing a suit should not be a defence to a corporate crime, okay? I think it's as simple as that. Also, I'll enforce the little-known piece of legislation, the Chris Hayward Act, which requires the actor Chris Hayward to be in every Australian film for at least 5 minutes. Right? We're not looking at that shit because, he's been in 2 in the last 12 months. Oh, he hasn't. There's 2 that he hasn't been in at all. So, okay. There are 3. Parliamentary reform. People with coloured hair will not be able to wear the following garments on the floor of Parliament. Burqas, onesies, or mankinis. Okay, I'm a lukewarm support for that proposition, but I think, okay, parliamentary reform, for big decisions, we'll need a majority of both houses of Parliament to get across the line. Like, say, I don't know, like when we go to war, just as a for instance, okay? Or when we send a contestant to Eurovision. Or decide whether to set up an AFL team in Tasmania. Yeah? Okay, we on the bus? Very good. Okay, good class. And, I don't know, electoral reform, I reckon you should have to sing a song before you get a pencil on polling day. It's just me. I think it'd sort of brighten it up, but the tone deaf would complain, but sucked in. I think the nation should be singing. All right, we'll move on. Media reform. Within 48 hours of being elected, I will double the budget of the ABC. Under a policy entitled Random Left-Wing Populism. Moreover, there will be a blanket ban on media appearances for politicians on weekends and every Wednesday. They have jobs to do, okay? And there will be on-the-spot fines for saying good to be with you during an interview. And anyway, if I was Lee Sales, my response would be, we'll see about that, mate. Okay, there we are, motion carried. 6, fiscal rectitude. Yes, we'll be able to fund all of these things because churches will pay tax, just like any other business, and the Scientologists will pay an additional dickhead levy. Good, okay, like we're making progress here. There'll also be a flag tax. If you want to put a flag in your front yard, you will pay for the bloody privilege. $100 per flag, per day, per boat in the driveway, per flat screen TV. And there's been a modification to tax policy, as there should be, daily, per throw cushion. Didn't see that coming, did you? Okay. Also, corporate tax accountancy in its totality will be banned, outlawed, consigned to the dustbin of history, like Netscape and the entire Australian car industry. And I think we'd do better without tax accountants, don't you think, Mullen? What do you reckon? I mean, how is it legal? Their job is to actually deprive the public of money that we invest in the Commonwealth. I mean, they should all be in jail. But instead, we're paying their ridiculous fees and they're putting really bad art in their offices. It's got to stop, people of Australia, it's got to stop. Now, offsetting that, I will inject money into the economy through the Ministry of Cricket. This is a long-held policy and I will stand and hold firm in these trying times. It's very confusing. And every household will get an allowance to buy a new cricket bat, a floppy hat each and a water bottle. The Minister for Cricket will be Kerry O'Keefe. There we are. Okay, good. See, that's the kind of guy we need, and Judith Lucy maybe, to sort of resuscitate what's left of the beautiful game. Okay, 8, human rights will make a massive comeback under my administration. Gillian Triggs was mentioned earlier, and I'm in negotiations with Gillian to have her appointed National Life Coach. 9, relentless optimism. Everyone, even here, I mean, I've been to politics in the pub before, and frankly, you're a little bit negative. You need to fire up and start changing this world instead of talking about it, you clowns. Okay? With all due respect, get out there and do something. Your time starts now. But in the meantime, I've got a couple of jokes. And see, when I was 21, there was no internet, there were no female CEOs, no native title, and no decent Indian restaurants anywhere in Australia. In fact, that's still true, but you get my general point. I mean, across the world, there's been transformation during my lifetime. You know, with infant mortality across the world down. Girls go to school in unimaginable numbers in every country on earth. There is no smoking in pubs in Scotland, which I regard as the most extraordinary thing that's happened during my adult life. And there's no MSG in any Chinese restaurant in the country outside the Gold Coast. It's a fact. Look it up. Now, who knows what Chicxulub is? And how many? Chicxulub? Chicxulub? Come on, I would have thought a forest of hands in the advanced class at Mullumbimby. You know, the asteroid that did for the dinosaurs. Right? And plunged the Earth into darkness. 75% of life on Earth, all the dinosaurs gone. See, the thing is, my point that I'm labouring here, hoping to plug into your erudition, Mullum, but, is that things happen when you least expect it. Like, Louis XVI, for example, well, they were just brontosaurus grazing on kale 1 minute, then boom, darkness for quite a few weeks. No one saw it coming apart from apparently there was a reasonably talented proto-flamingo on the outskirts of Caracas, but apart from that, they had no idea. Like, Louis XVI, 1 minute sniffing his perfume, lavender sort of, cuffs. Next minute, head in a basket. Tsar Nicholas, 1 minute, ruler of all Mother Russia. Next minute, all of these smelly workers storming the palace. Kevin Rudd, 1 minute. Kevin Rudd, still Kevin Rudd, poor bugger. Things do change. And you don't need me, Mullum. People of Australia, you don't need another hero. You can do it yourself. You really can be the Chicxulub of justice. The difficulty is that you've been using the wrong 3-word slogans like stop the boats, jobs and growth, and I guess in Labor's case it was working families. And, you need a new 3-word slogan like, I don't know, altruism, gratitude, love. How's that? Can you see that on a poster? Wouldn't that be lovely and unlikely? And an electoral inevitability. Let's make that happen. Together we can kill all of the dinosaurs as the Chicxulub of justice. All the dinosaurs, including Sir Erica Betts. Which is my drag name. And in my administration, all Prime Ministers going forward must have a drag name. And to finish, I want to sum up with a pair of hula hoops. Naturally. Can I have a couple of accomplices? Young lady. Round of applause for Nina here. Someone else? Lenny? Here we go. Here we go. Come on, Lenny. Round of applause for Lenny as well. He's doing this very reluctantly. Good on you, Lenny. Okay. So basically what we have here is a kind of working demonstration of the one thing we all remember from school maths, right? The Venn diagram. And the circles represent our private lives, okay? And the joining up bit in the middle represents our common wealth. Are you with me? Yes, it is an absolutely tortured metaphor, but that's what this country needs. And my point is, because I'm getting the wind up here. My point is that what we need to do is to grow the joining up bit. Okay, because if we grow the joining up bit, which is full of good things like public schools and hospitals and libraries and fly-blown regional showgrounds and that sort of thing. How do we think those things got there in the first place, right? We passed the hat around, You know, Joyce Main didn't run a telethon. We did it ourselves. We didn't need Macquarie Bank. Okay, now what we need to do is to grow that bit in the middle, because if we have death by 1,000 tax cuts, it gets too tight in there and everybody hurts. Which is by far and away the worst song REM recorded. But if you guys, can you hold it like that? Okay, Nina, wrong end. Okay. Never work with animals, or what's the expression? Okay, and the thing is that you'll notice that the metaphor works. It works a little bit like a cervix. And if we come through, the nation can be reborn, Mullen. Come together. Round of applause for Lenny and Nina. Thanks very much.
Thank you, kids. Wow. Can we have you every month, Molly? That was just so great to have a laugh. So now we're going to start with Sue Higginson, and let's just hope she doesn't kind of lock herself to the mic or the stage or anything, and we can get her out of here. But please welcome everyone. Nice warm Mullumbimby welcome for Sue Higginson.
Hello everybody. Wow, it's absolutely so fantastic to be here in Mullum. The lights are very bright, and following an act like that, surely we've got our 10-point plan, we just have a beer and we all get on with it. That was rather profound, really. So I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land of which we meet. Pay my respects, always was, always will be Aboriginal land. Can I just do a tiny little local test here? This is purely my indulgence, having come from the other side of Lismore. Can everyone hear me okay? Yeah, I'm going to take it up. A bit more? Okay. So, from coming over the other side of Lismore tonight and travelling in and seeing the beautiful Mount Chinkogans just right there, incredible in front of your eyes, I just wondered, who in this room went to Bentley? Hands up. Yeah, I had a feeling. Who in this room knows about Bentley? Okay. Yeah, I was incredibly curious because I was, doing the distance, the landscape, etc. Came into this pub and just thought, my God, it's just full of incredibly switched on people who are here and do politics in the pub. If I tried to put on politics in the pub in Casino, which is where I kind of live, it just wouldn't be like this, I guarantee. So I'm going to talk to you and give you a snapshot of what I refer to as the Environmental Justice Project. And it's something that I want you all to be able to go home and understand and know about and be a part of if you're not already. And so, just very briefly, my background is I started literally locked onto a bulldozer. Some of my colleagues who were there at the same time are here tonight. And very, very young, very concerned about the future, very concerned about what we were doing. And at the time, the biggest environmental problem was the loss of biodiversity. That was, being coined as the biggest challenge of our time. Some of us obviously were talking about climate change, but it wasn't the front and centre project. What was at the time was biodiversity loss, and how are we going to stop it and reverse it? And so, of course, I went straight to the front line and, right, we're cutting down the old trees, we can't do that, it's home to the animals, let's stop that. And it was a really incredible project, and it was very much born, as most of you know, up here on the North Coast, and we fought very hard and we won. We won the battle to protect the old growth forests. Through that journey, what I learnt was there actually are these incredible institutions. I actually was the rat bag around the fire that actually thought what we need is a bloody revolution because nothing's working. We need to go back. We need to do the, come through the cervix of the hula hoops and go to the Channel Market, do all of that, and we need to be reborn. But what I actually learnt while I was on the front lines was that there were a load of my colleagues that were running incredible public interest environmental law cases through the courts. They were getting injunctions. There were people that were running alternative media stories to try and tell the story. Although in those days the ABC was still really good. I remember having to drive down the road in this big four-wheel drive and pick up Alan Tate, who flew in his helicopter because he came to see the forest wars on the front line. The thought of that happening now and the ABC actually resourcing that kind of media coverage is actually a bit sad. We just had the massive Time to Choose rally in Sydney on the weekend, and there was barely any ABC media coverage about it. But we did. I witnessed fantastic alternative media channels, people telling the news about the forest wars and the fight on the front line that was actually getting won. We actually, off the back of those early 90s forest wars, we actually got our first ever member of New South Wales Parliament elected, Greens member Ian Cohen, who's here tonight. That was an absolutely fabulous revolutionary moment. So the sort of narrative around that was actually our institutions were working on some level. We were seeing some really significant law reform at the time. In 1995, we saw the introduction of legislation that was world-class about how we would protect the environment, how we would protect threatened species, and not long after we saw the end, legally, of broad-scale land clearing in New South Wales. It was a fantastic and phenomenal agenda that was set by a bunch of very, very clever people, everyone operating at the grassroots level in their various ways, whether they were the lawyers in the Community Legal Centre, the civil society NGOs, the parliamentarians in Parliament, media people. It was all working. And in my mind, it is actually, those institutions are actually still there, and they're still available to us, and they still can work for us. But we've just got some really serious mechanics to do. We have got some really fundamental recalibration to do. So I've just spent the last 15 years working as a public interest environmental lawyer on the front line of working with communities all around New South Wales to try and protect their local environment. It may be something as significant as a brand new greenfield open cut coal mine, the Bentley affair here, or it may be something as, on a different scale, which is clearing vegetation to open up a new road, and that vegetation is in fact remnant native vegetation. All of these communities all around New South Wales, and I've been very New South Wales based, they are working, they are there at the grassroots level. They don't necessarily all have the same day-to-day values as us here in Mullumbimby, or they may not have the same desires for the future. But what I have witnessed is there are some incredibly common themes about what is happening in the grassroots, at the grassroots level, all across New South Wales. And people are waking up again, and more. Coal seam gas and mining has been one of the most interesting environmental disputes that's been happening at the grassroots all across New South Wales. We saw, I had a radio interview with Alan Jones, and I got in 3 words, yes, Alan, that's right. Yes, Alan, that's right. But what was really incredible about that was he saw somebody like me doing what I was doing as something really important, and that was providing a legal voice to members of communities that had woken up one morning and realised that they had the fight of their life on their hands. They had to stand up for what mattered to them, their local environment, their water, the social fabric, their community. They were fighting a mining giant. They needed help. So what's happened, and Bentley has been an incredible example to us, what we have seen is when people come together, they mobilise around our existing institutions, then incredible things can happen to facilitate change, whether that is to protect the environment, as in to roll back the status quo of destroying the environment. So one thing that the issue with, so law is my expertise, and the Environmental Justice Project is the thing that really I switched on to at a very, very early age. One of the difficulties with the institution of law, of course, is that, and our environmental laws, is that it is all anthropocentric. It's all about humans. And it's all about humans because it's about humans standing up for the environment. One of the Politics in the Pub sessions in a few goes will be from Michelle Maloney. She's this fabulous legal academic that talks about environmental law as an earth-centred laws. She talks about rights for the environment. You've probably all heard about, you know, the rivers in New Zealand all of a sudden having legal rights and rights of being persons equivalent to other people in the legal system. And we've seen this in some countries in South America where the earth has rights. I've got a slightly controversial view on all of that, and Michelle and I have had these conversations many times, and that is we're not very good in a rights discourse. In fact, we're failing terribly in a rights discourse. We treat other humans without fairness and without equality. So just providing the environment rights is not going to help the environment. And I really, as an environmental law expert, want everybody to know that just by giving a river rights, it's not going to protect the river. What is going to protect the river is humans in parliaments making very good laws that say the river will be protected. That's how our institutions actually work. They're designed to work and they can work, but we need to really understand them. We need to get in them and we need to take them over to make them work the way we want them to work. So at the moment, when I talk about an environmental law framework, there's key features, and I'm just going to quickly tell you what they are. So when you see them in your day-to-day affairs or you read them in the news, you know that's our institution of law, and it's environmental law, and it can work. For example, we have substantive laws, and they are the actual laws that say what you can and can't do to the environment or what needs to be protected. We have laws that provide access to information. We call them freedom of information laws. They're really important in the environmental justice framework. Just today, it was incredible. I don't know if people watched some of the work I did on the Murray-Darling Basin and trying to, that was a case we did trial by media. And the idea with that case was we knew that there was a hell of a racket happening over in the Murray-Darling and the Barwon-Darling and the unlawful taking of water. And we had enough information at EDIC to know what was happening, but it was terribly hard to push through to be able to reveal exactly what was happening in the right place at the right time to catch the crooks. Really interesting today, and we've made some real headway. People are being prosecuted now for stealing water and making the Darling River run backwards at the time when Broken Hill should be getting the water. And I don't know if people saw it today, but it was incredible. Still, the head of Water New South Wales actually said to the perpetrators of the water theft, and we've only just managed to receive these documents under freedom of information laws, that he was trying to work out ways to assist the water thieves so that they didn't have to provide the information to the community and to the other regulators so that his privacy was maintained, because privacy is very important. It's a very, very, very crooked, perverse thing to do. But at the end of the day, the institutional framework to access that information has prevailed. It's taken work, it's taken a long time, but it is in fact working. So freedom of information is really important. Having your say, this right of public participation, It is absolutely what environmental protection relies on. We need to participate. I know everybody in here has written 3,000 submissions and their hand is broken from it and they hate doing it. But we must continue to participate, because when I've been to international environmental law forums and I've sat around with people and said, yeah, we have these rights to participate, I've had other environmental lawyers from other countries look and go, God, we wish we had that. And here we are, we're getting tired of it. We're getting tired of participating. We must never get tired of participating, because it's a right we've worked hard for and it's a right we must continue to exercise. One of the really big problems we have in our environmental law, and anybody in here, in fact I was speaking to an aquatic ecologist who's here, who appeared as an expert witness in a court case trying to protect the environment. Independent environmental impact assessment. It's a really big problem and you all know it. You all know when you see a proposal and your local environment's about to be destroyed, or West Byron's about to be built, and it's all kind of making us feel sick, and we look at the environmental impact assessment and we know it's not independent. We know that it's not the best scientific document that we should be working from. So we need to improve this as well, and we can do. The other really important part about the Environmental Justice Project is providing communities rights to challenge decisions in courts, to actually seek environmental justice through the court. That's where I've worked, and that's where I have seen some fabulous results and some incredible things happen. So the kind of the project at the moment is, we need better environmental laws, the actual substantive laws. We know that the Great Barrier Reef is suffering because the laws are letting what's happened to the Barrier Reef happen. The laws that should be protecting the Barrier Reef need to be more protective. And if I told you one of the real secrets of environmental law and how simple it could be to make it work, you would probably fall off your chair. It can be as simple as this. The proponent, a person may not do something. The difference between a person shall not do something. Just taking out the simple discretion of a simple clause so that it does, the decision to protect something doesn't rely on the exercise of discretion of one person who's sitting in a particular decision-making role that day, and more of an actual environmental ethic approach to the substantive laws, which is really not that far away. We can do it. The one thing we need to be able to do that is to send good members of our community into our parliaments, because the parliaments actually make our laws. The courts can enforce our laws, the people can talk about how they want our laws, but we must never forget the institution of Parliament. Yes, it's there to govern, but its primary role is to make laws. And if we want good laws, we need good members of Parliament in there to make laws. Is it becoming really obvious I'm going to run for Parliament at some point? But the reality is, and we've seen it happen. He's been in Parliament. He knows what I'm talking about. So, the reality is, the reason the Great Barrier Reef is suffering, the reason we have just ended the ban on broad-scale land clearing in New South Wales, which the science has told us is going to have catastrophic impacts on our natural environment in certain areas in New South Wales. But the reason that ban on broad-scale land clearing has ended is because the Barragiclian government just passed laws to let that happen. Yeah. That's how it happened. It's not that some evil person somewhere, and I'm sure there are many evil people somewhere sitting, and we know that there were quite a few trying to influence those laws, but how in fact it happened was they passed those laws, and that's what we must not forget. The reason we are pumping greenhouse gases into the atmosphere like there's no tomorrow, I sat down with Peter Garrett just before he became the Environment Minister. We all know where that went. But I sat down with him And he genuinely looked me in the eye when I said to him, in our Commonwealth environmental laws, Peter, you know what we need right now is a greenhouse gas trigger. You know that. And he said, it's done. I am going to do that. And it never happened. It just never happened. And why? Because there weren't enough good members of Parliament like Peter Garrett to push that greenhouse trigger through into law. So, of course, and that's what I mean by, of course, there's people out there trying to influence. There will always be people out there trying to influence what laws and how they're made. But the reality is, and I know it sounds trite, but it's the people in there that actually succumb to that influence and make those laws. So at the end of the day, the key messages to any law project is the foundations are simple and the foundations are clear. I know we had the slogans and they were hilarious, but the real slogans, the ones that actually matter and are not slogans, is our system and our institutions of democracy, and what I'm talking about is our courts, our parliaments and our civil society organisations. The basis of all of those that bring us together are justice, fairness and equality. And if we had that as our ultimate measure for all our laws, for all of the accountability of our institutions of democracy, then we would be faring in a much, much better way. And at the end of the day, as I said, I do feel a little bit of... Actually, there was one more thing, sorry, before I go. Somebody trolled me on Facebook and said that they would pay $50 to the Lismore Duck Pond Environmental Project if I got through my whole talk without mentioning Adani. Did I mention Adani once? No, okay, great. So that's $50 for the duck pond. But clearly, one of the things in terms of Adani is there are these things happening. I'm allowed to, because he said in the first 3 sentences or something. So I've survived it. But what you do all know at the moment is ending coal in New South Wales is one of the most important gigs for the Environmental Justice Project at the moment. It categorically is. Jeremy Buckingham of the Greens, who is the spokesperson on energy, released yesterday, who is doing remarkable work, released yesterday the Greens plan, an energy policy to end for coal, phase coal out within 10 years. It's the only sound energy policy in New South Wales right now. And when I left, when I left EDO at the end of October last year, and I was looking around and thinking, what am I really going to do next? Yes, I'll carry on practice law, and yes, I'll do these things. But something in my belly said, no, where is something really worthwhile happening right now? And the place I have ended up, and the organisation I have joined, is actually my local Greens group. That's where I've got. So other than walking around with a bag load of stickers now, which just seems to be par for the course, I've joined an organisation that I actually truly believe still resonates with those principles, justice, fairness and equality. And I'm sure most of you are aware of the Greens, but there is the 4 basic pillars: ecologically sustainable society, grassroots democracy, social justice, and peace and democracy. These are the principles that we all need to continually embrace in every project that we take forward. And so I'm going to finish there, because the more time we have for Q&A, the better. And Vinay is going to talk to you about actually really that creating a revolution is what it sounded like. You ask Vinay when he gets up to show you his notes.
Oh, no.
Thank you very much, everyone.
So first I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land. And now that I've been jobbed in, I have to show you my notes.
You do, yes.
So I don't know if you can see them all, but these are my notes. You probably can't see at the back. Feel free to come and take a look later if you like. This is a mind map. It looks like a horrible example of modern art, but it's actually just my thoughts on tonight and what I'll be saying. So if anyone actually wants an explanation of how I can read this, I'm happy to give it to you, or during the Q&A if you like. So what I'm going to be talking about tonight is the question of how do we win? Right? It's ultimately, no matter how esoteric or how philosophical or academic, anything I might say tonight, it always comes back down to this practical question of how do we win? And so I'll tell you my own story. So I'm a millennial, and sorry, is that better? Okay. So I'm a millennial, and like most millennials, I was taught that I could change the world. Right? Throughout my education, they were said you can change the world, whether it be TV or Hollywood, or my high school teachers, they all said you can change the world. And so I've spent my entire life since then thinking about that question. How do we change the world? And for me, it's almost a mechanical question. I almost approach it like an engineer would, right? From a mathematical perspective. So if we think of everything, I suppose, even political problems, as engineering problems in a way, we can see, okay, well, there's our objective. How do we work backwards from that objective to achieve it? So the question we're asking is if we ask today, is how do we win, right? And so the first thing I would say, and when my background is I worked in international law for a while, in international criminal law, in advocacy, and the question that kept coming to mind was when I said, well, how do we win? The answer was power. And the word power obviously sounds like a dirty word. We try to avoid that word and saying power. But the truth is that that's the only way we can overcome our opposition. It's by having enough power to advance our agenda. So if we're thinking in these almost quasi-engineering terms, how do we engage enough power, then we've got to ask ourselves a series of questions. So the first question is, when we're saying, well, how do we win? Who are we? Who are we? Are we Aboriginal activists? Are we environmental activists? Are we anti-poverty activists? Are we campaigning for more funding for the arts? For science? Are we here for women's rights, for refugees? Are we here for financial regulation for the banks? We're here for all of those things, I imagine, or most of us are. And so that's the question is, well, what kind of a movement is this? What kind of power are we building when we're scattered amongst 1,001 different issues, all of which are very important, of course. And so this is the question, is how do we bring it all together to develop enough power? And the thing is when we talk about power, power is numbers, right? Well, obviously, our side of politics is not going to be the money side of politics, so it's not going to be financial power, probably not military power, I imagine, hopefully. So yeah, it's people power, right? So the question is, how do we bring all these movements together under a single banner? And so, for me, the identity, and which I'll be talking about in more detail later, is a progressive identity. Right? And what does this even mean? Well, we'll get there. But I first want to talk about a model, just a literal practical model of how we could bring these different movements together and have sufficient power to win. And just so you know, this is a model that could not only work nationally within Australia, but I mean, the idea for this came when I was working in international law. The only way we could influence international policy is if we had a grassroots movement that simultaneously operated across the world and was able to influence politicians domestically through a heavy level of local organisation, but had to be coordinated. Now this seems like an extraordinary thing because such a thing doesn't exist. So that's why I'm here to ask, how do we do it? But for tonight, I'm going to focus on the national, because obviously these models can be applied both nationally, in a state level, or internationally as well. So the model that I want to throw out to you tonight is where this has worked before in Australia, is the union movement. So for whatever your opinions are on the union movement and the Labor Party today, the union movement has been one of the most successful movements in human history. You had a whole group of different industries they were activists, that came together under a single identity and said, we are union, we are labour, right? And it became more than a question of, I'm here just to advocate for a certain interest for my industry. It became even more than, I'm here to advocate for a certain set of interests for all workers. It became a fundamental identity. And this is the first aspect of power. So the model I would like to propose, to throw out there, and this is open for discussion, is that all those issues I mentioned, whether it be Aboriginal issues or poverty issues or environmental issues, for us to win, we've got to have a progressive equivalent of that, right? Which is some sort of umbrella organisation like the Australian Council of Trade Unions, which brings together these these different issues under a single umbrella, not to confine them or to restrict them, but simply so that they can pool resources, project a common brand across the media, and be a source of political power for the progressive movement. Now, some of you may be thinking, I mean, the last time I discussed this, people were saying, well, why hasn't this happened so far, right? This is a sort of often a moment of awakening. Well, why haven't we done that? It's simply because, for historical reasons, most of the movements that I've described sprung up in the 70s, and they've gone their own separate ways and are only now starting to come together. And this is the moment where we've got to start to bring them under a single common banner. So, so one element, as I said, would be that sort of peak body element, where you've got different issues, so different issue-based organisations, probably progressive advocacy organisations, working in a member-style entity, right? So there would be members of this organisation, and collectively they're direct decision-making, and they could run campaigns just like Your Rights at Work, right? Which was obviously a very effective campaign, and the many campaigns that the unions movement has run effectively. But also, and this is critical, is that it would need to have a local element, right? And not just a local element, but I think the heart of the progressive movement, it can't be a group of organisations working together at the top and planning campaigns. The heart of any movement has got to be us. It's got to be communities on the ground. So we've heard about community tonight. We've heard about groups working together. We've heard about leadership development. This is going to be the heart of the movement. So I think any entity that will work like this, that had a, sort of an umbrella arm, would also have to have these local chapters, which I call progressive community hubs, which are for bringing people together in each electorate with shared values. And they could be the activists on that area. So, for example, if you had an organisation that said, well, we'd like to campaign on this issue, then they would throw it out to all the local hubs in every electorate, and they would have the option to campaign on that if they'd made the case for it. So, practically, what would this do? Is that you'd have why would organisations join? Is because suddenly they have the power to project themselves across the entire country, and that's what every progressive advocacy organisation wants, is the power to project themselves. So if we start building something like this, then we have the ability to do it, like they would join in a heartbeat. And I think that the way we would see is the hubs, these local community hubs, would be a shared resource for them to all tap into, right? And for me, the most powerful aspect of this isn't, as I said, it isn't the organisations coming together, as powerful as that would be. It's all the individuals out there, all the many millions and millions of progressives in this country and billions around the world who think, I'm all alone in this. I can't do this alone. I'm just an individual, I'm powerless. This takes that away, right? Not only does it take it away locally, because you're connected to people who share your values, but you've got the backing of these large organisations, and suddenly you're part of something bigger. So what we have is the concrete ability to build a real movement. Now, I want to get a little bit more into detail about this. So I want to go back to that question. We said, how do we win? It's about building enough power, right? So what is this thing, power, that we're talking about, and a people power? Let's get down to it. People need a few things, right, to really commit. One of them is shared values and identity. And so I mentioned a progressive identity earlier, right? As opposed to identifying with just any one of these issues. What is a progressive identity? It's a new concept, or relatively new concept, but it'd be one just as important as the concept of we are union. So before I get into what I think a progressive identity is, let's look at the exact opposite, what a conservative identity is. Now, conservative identity has clearly been building up, and I think over the last few years we've seen a string of victories for conservatives around the world. It's terrifying. I'm terrified, right? But it's also an opportunity. Like, we've seen dictators popping up around the world, right-wing populism going everywhere, whether it be Trump or Duterte in the Philippines, or Modi in India, or in Hungary. What is going on here? And it's Turkey as well, yeah, thank you. I mean, there's countless other examples. Italy, there were just elections in the last couple of weeks. What is going on here? And my theory is that it's a response to globalization. Now, our side of politics has been fighting economic injustice since the 90s, or maybe even earlier. That's been caused by globalization. But sadly, we weren't successful, I think, in fighting it. And what happened? It turned to the inevitable rage, and now it's turned to fear of change. That is what's driving this modern conservative movement. If we look at why Trump won, why he won all those states, the traditionally blue states, or at least swing, Ohio, Pennsylvania, they all went red because said we're afraid of change, and Trump said I'll bring jobs back. Whether he can, probably not, right? But the thing is that he said change is bad. I'll make America great again. I'll restore you to the past. And this is what all of these conservative identities are doing. They're saying change is bad, change is evil. Let's go back. And unfortunately, along with the economic argument, which we probably, to some extent agree with, they're coupling with, well, all change is bad, immigration is bad, other religions are bad, ideas are bad, intellectualism is bad. Let's just reject all of it. So progressivism then is the exact opposite of that, right? It's a willingness to embrace change. A progressive identity at its heart is saying that not that all change is good. It's not. Clearly, it's not. But perhaps it changes the one constant of the universe, right? If we can be philosophical for a moment, we can accept that change is a constant in the universe. So as progressives, our job is to run with it, right? Roll with the punches. Know that at times it's going to be bad, but we're not going to have a wholehearted rejection of change. Now, the second element of a progressive identity, as I said, not all change is good. So is what direction do we want that change to be? Compassionate, all right? We want to have compassionate change. Now, just to give an example again, so let's look at the issues that we talked about. I talked about Aboriginal issues, poverty issues, environmental issues, women's rights. None of us are actually, anyone who's campaigned on these issues, nobody's happy with the status quo, understandably. So what we are wanting is change, but in a compassionate direction. And so that is the heart of progressive identity. Now, it's obviously, this is a bit obtuse and philosophical, so I'm happy to have a more academic type discussion here, but I know that we'll have to find a better way to communicate this at large. But I think that at the moment, we've got no choice but to build such a movement. Like, I think until now we were thinking, well, perhaps a progressive movement is something we could build, it would be nice to build, but the other side have out-organized us. The conservatives are winning across the planet. So we have no choice but to respond and build this and to hold up a torch, perhaps in resistance to what's going on around the world. And not to say that, we're not here to say that free trade is amazing or anything like that. We're here to say that we're not here to reject change, and we're here because we think that it's still possible to change and have compassionate ends. I think we can all win together through that. So if that's the second point about power that people need, so is that idea of shared values and identity. And we'll have to find a way to communicate it, as I said, but someone won't join a movement unless they connect on that basic values level, that basic identity level, just in the way that the union movement did. So that brings up the final element of what I think power is about. Power is also about, for people, as far as people are concerned, is about survival. Right? So if we look at the union movement, right, they were under, when it started, under extremely harsh conditions. People were, in those sort of industrial mills of the early 1800s. That's where it all began. People were literally fighting for survival at times. Now, often for many of us, we can look at our politics and we can say, well, that's something, it's good, I really identify as a progressive and I want to do it. But does it often directly affect us? Well, unless we're one of those listed groups, so maybe it doesn't, right? Maybe it doesn't. And that, in that hard moment when we've got to choose between ourselves and our activism, maybe we sometimes choose ourselves. And that's that harsh moment. And I think that what a really, truly powerful movement affects survival, and it touches on those survival issues, because at that point people have no choice. Then you're all in when it comes to your identity. So what does that mean in practice? What does that really mean, right? So I mentioned earlier the potential model You know, we've got these umbrella organisations, but on the ground you've got these local activist hubs, which are called progressive community hubs. Progressive community hubs shouldn't just be about political organising, they should be about economics. They should first and foremost be community building, and what that means is touching on people's economic needs. It means if you've got a group of people who are unemployed, which is certainly going to increase in the future with automation, you've got a group of unemployed people coming together and saying, how can we help each other survive, right? Now, obviously, it doesn't have to just be pure survival. It could also mean you could have a group of very affluent people who come together and say, well, you know, maybe we want a sharing economy, for example. Even a very small example of this, which I've seen, is you know, a group of people, neighbours that have shared their lawnmower because they realised they didn't all need a lawnmower, right? And they didn't want to all, you know, be materialistic and have their own lawnmower, so they shared their lawnmower. So there are different ways you can do the sharing from, you know, from a collective at its core through to something like, you know, a simple sharing economy. And you know, there's quite a lot of hope. You can see that a lot of the economic models that are coming out today, like Uber, and I mean, Uber has its problems, but a lot of the, or Airbnb, which I know is pretty popular around this region, sharing is becoming normalized, right? So if we can find a way to make sharing normal, recreate the concept of community around shared progressive values, and then politically activate it in every electorate around the country, or possibly even the world, you have the formula for the largest movement the world has ever seen. All right? So this is what we're going to do. Now, I want to give a practical example of this, just so you know that it's not only can work, it's not theoretical, but is working. So where one of these ideas came from is the Black Lives Matter movement in the United States. So I was doing some work in the US with some activists over there, and one of the biggest problems they had was their activists were experiencing burnout. They were traveling from city to city, spending all their cash on accommodation and food, and it just wasn't working for them. And so someone had an idea, well, why don't we build an ongoing activist hub in each of these cities? Really simple, we could grow our own food, have really simple food, or have very simple shelter constructed. Someone who has a larger, you know, bit of property, we can set it up on that. Really, really simple idea. They've started building them, and what's happened is that those areas have become little activist hubs. But from there, they're starting to influence and campaign on other issues around the year. So it's not just come election time, they'll get out and start campaigning. These little activist hubs have become seeds of influence of progressive values in their community, right? And now they're linking over the internet, right? And organisationally across the US. Imagine how powerful that is when it comes time to run a joint campaign. Right? That's what I'm proposing here, is the mechanics of building a true movement. So just in summary, for I finish up, is that we've got to show a bit of respect to the organisations that are leading in that space, and let them lead with their expertise and bring them together in some kind of umbrella. But at the same time, most importantly, we've got to recognise that we are the heart of this, right, on the ground. We've got to build these local hubs and realise that we're building communities. Now, the real power of this is that nothing I've said relies on the outcome of an election. Nothing, right? Obviously, we're going to try to win elections. That's what part of what these things are for. But we're building them, and independent of them, we're free of them, right? If we can build these things outside, it doesn't matter even if Cory Bernardi became Prime Minister tomorrow, heaven forbid that he doesn't. But we could still do this, right? In fact, that might actually act as an impetus, right? So, on that note, I'll let it go. So thank you very much.
1.2 million Australians are in Get Up. Yep. They organise on the principles of Bernie Sanders and Jeremy Corbyn's campaign, which affected 100 million Americans. In the case of Bernie Sanders, it is a grassroots organisation, and we have an overarching central situation which helps us with organisational matters and funding. Obviously, we're under threat at the moment. How is that different than what you've suggested, Vinay?
Okay, excellent. All right. So thank you for your question. So Get Up is an excellent organisation. I hope most of the people here are involved in it. I guess what I'm proposing, what it would be different, is that I'm proposing more of a coalition of organisations. So GetUp is its own entity. Where I think the real power we can have is to work alongside something with GetUp, is to bring the many different community organisations out there under a single umbrella. So whether that be a nationally based disability organisation or for example a nationally based human rights organisation, what I'm proposing is a place where they could all come together and potentially even meld their membership, or at least cross-inform their membership. So I actually think once you combine all these different groups, you've got potentially probably more reach, and you'd also have a lot more direct ownership. So as I said, I hope you're all involved in GetUp. I'm involved in GetUp myself. The gap that I see is about bringing other existing community organisations together in a collective decision-making space, and I think that would change how many grassroots organisations interact with such a movement.
Thank you. Who else has got a question? Sue, do you want to say something to that?
Yeah, can I say something?
Turn it, press up the button.
Oh, that's
up.
right, you press and then hold, don't you?
No, just press up.
Oh, you just press it up.
Hello. I want to tell you a really funny story, and I'm sorry if this is far too cynical, but when EDO acted for the Mackay Conservation Group, I just want to talk about how complex the idea is. And the idea that came to my mind when you were talking about these grassroots hubs, I couldn't stop thinking about the knitting nanas and how they are that, and they're so good at mobilising these local hubs and rocking up, and there's a lot to learn from the knitting nanas right now. But something really interesting about the diversity and important about the diversity of different organisations and their autonomy. And this is a funny story, but when we acted as EDO for the Mackay Conservation Group, and we challenged the Adani coal mine in 2015, and we challenged in the federal court the Greg Hunt's decision to approve the mine, and we won. We actually got the approval for the Carmichael mine set aside. And I will never forget the day after I had announced to the world, you're not going to believe it, I've just got a letter from the lawyers for Adani Mine and the Commonwealth Minister. They've conceded defeat and we've won. And anyway, I let the news get out, and it was just so funny because half an hour later, on my feed, my social media and all my emails and everything else, there's GetUp, and it said, "We won!" And we did, obviously. But what was really funny was the politics around all the people who were at the very many layers of, and this identity of, hang on, GetUp didn't win, we won. No, Mackay won. No, we won. And it was just such an interesting, almost like my pop psychology kind of came into play about, wow, it's incredible. And what ended up being concluded at the end of the day was, that's right, we all won. So yeah, maybe some more harmony around it all.
And Mark, would you like to?
This is just directed maybe towards Vinay? Yep, okay. Vinay, you referred to the union movement and how the need for survival against atrocious work conditions brought people together across a whole range of diversity of industries for sort of common cause and whatnot. And I was attracted to come here tonight because it was advertised as the politics of urgency, and I suppose I can't help be a little bit issued in terms of looking at urgency. I'm a biophysical scientist, I'm an ecologist, and the urgency that I'm really concerned about is the fact that we're looking at exponential change in climate change and impacts. And I just like, for instance, it took 150 years for us to clock up the first half a degree of global warming post-industrial revolution, only 50 years for the next half degree, and we're on track for the next half a degree to be in 20 years. So if the next half a degree is in 10 years, the next in 5, you get the point where I'm going. We're looking at exponential change. We have got to respond politically in a decadal timescale to existential threat to society and humanity. So the question is, do you think that rather than try to be all things to all people, you mentioned all the different types of umbrella groups, and there's the social justice movements, and there's, you know, etc., etc. You know, there's the old adage about, you know, no land rights for gay whales on a dead planet, or no asylum for gay whales on a dead planet. Is there some merit in perhaps elevating beyond all other issues this key central existential threat as something that could bring people together across the full political spectrum, both left and right, as an issue of survival, and so that we can seek a pragmatic middle path for a survivable future?
Thank you for your question. So I guess yes and no. So a few things I would say is that, one, we can certainly have anchoring issues. Like, I think if we're bringing different groups together, we could certainly prioritise certain issues at any given time. And an organisation which is an umbrella group could do that. It would have the legitimacy to do that as well, because it would have different groups saying that, and as such would communicate to their membership as well that, look, we're not just here for X issue, this issue is one of survival. But I guess the cynic in me will also address that very, very difficult question of saying, well, if someone who is maybe even like us, they're progressive, and they say, well, at the end of the day, like, something subconscious may think, well, climate change isn't going to directly affect me. And it may not be a conscious thought, but that may be what stops them from becoming, if not more politically active or not engaging as much. Because the problem sometimes we have with climate change is that it can seem distant or far away, even when it's not. So when I talk about survival, so I don't dispute anything you've said, and I think we need to bring everything you said to the fore. But when I talk about survival, I also think we have to hit people's economic needs. And that's why I was, and that sort of adds to the other question before about the difference with GetUp, is that I suppose GetUp is primarily trying to be an activist, political activist organisation. What I'm proposing is primarily a community building organisation that would build activism on the back of that community strength. And that would make to a significant difference in terms of operations. And the primary thing, I would say the most important thing for an organisation like this to do on the ground would be building economic links and having people supporting each other economically. And that's how I'd say survival would be most directly affected on a concrete level. So again, not disputing anything you said, but for me survival also means touching people's direct economic lives, their pocketbooks.
Can I make a vaguely serious comment on these themes? I think the idea of a sort of broadly progressive alliance is a laudable idea, and it's a lot like what Beppe Grillo did. A comedian started the Five-Star movement in Italy, and I think they ended up the largest parliament at the end of the Italian election. So it shows you, Mullum, what is possible.
Yes.
But to make a connection between the urgency of climate change and, you know, how you might politically respond to this moment, I think there's a real problem in politics now is that it doesn't speak, like, and this is across the spectrum, the major parties, the Greens, all included in this observation. I don't think politics currently speaks properly, meaningfully or resonantly to most ordinary people across the Western world, to the main concern of most people, which is their fear of economic uncertainty. And I think the tactical and maybe strategic error that green movements have made across the West, in my humble opinion, is that the focus is on the looming catastrophe and the narrower solutions of renewable energy, as opposed to shaping green politics as an answer to fundamental economic uncertainty. That's my view, and I think the failure of the major parties to meaningfully answer that question is what produces a lot of the ratbag populism that you're seeing across the West as well. That's my vote. Yeah. Well, anyway, I just feel I feel that, like, very seriously, that clearly, you know, Trump attracted a lot of people who had had that sense of insecurity, not just economic security, but I think, for example, if in one of the jokes that I sometimes make is that, do you know what? If we suddenly solved unemployment in regional Queensland, a lot of those people in big hats would overnight seem a lot less racist. And it's not even that funny, but I think it's true. You know, and the connection between addressing economic insecurity and climate change is the only thing that's going to get that sense of urgency that you're after, mate.
Can I just add though, I agree, and I'm again not disputing really, but I think we're also being had a bit. New South Wales just announced last year in July a surplus of 5.7 billion smackers. We are filthy rich right now. We have so much money, we could actually fix most of New South Wales' problems. We just aren't engaged enough to know, to take the control and to tell people what we want. We are too busy at the moment trying to talk about what's not good enough. We're not scrutinising these institutions. We've stopped believing in our institutions. We are criticising them and pulling them down. And at the end of the day, I don't necessarily think it is the actual, say, members of parliament job to talk to everybody, but because they can't, they try. It's our job. It's our job to be talking to each other. These conversations, they happen around our kitchen tables, they happen in our lounge room, they happen in our markets, they happen in our pubs. And we are the ones responsible for being informed and talking to each other. I saw recently, you know, I got involved with a wonderful woman in the room here in the campaign around Batman. You know, it was a really remarkable by-election. For the first time in Australia, we saw a really progressive, and it is a progressive seat, we know that. It defines itself as progressive. Anthony Green defines it as progressive, therefore it must be progressive. And that seat, what we saw was some of the most amazing political campaigning we've ever seen. Adani, what was happening in North Queensland around the Great Barrier Reef was relevant to a by-election in Melbourne. It was a really important way of focusing, and people listened, people looked, people watched, and people started to switch on and care about Adani. I actually got involved sitting here in Mullumbimby, ringing people in their lounge rooms about what they're going to do in the by-election that next Saturday, and what do they think about Adani. I got some of the most incredible, I got a couple of the most incredible discussions. I sat there and thought, I better talk to this woman about, you know, the economy and all these really important things. And she said to me, oh, actually, I'm really worried about climate change. And I thought, oh, you beauty, let's talk. You know, but it was really incredible. We've got to stop the fear and stop second-guessing what people think, what we think people are frightened of, or what. We've got to be proactive and positive, and we've got to deal in facts and evidence. New South Wales has 5.6 billion, and that's just surplus. That's not included what they projected to profit. So we've got a lot of money. So the economic uncertainty I understand. So let's work on debunking it at the moment here in New South Wales.
I'd like to just acknowledge Vinay, because he actually gives me some hope for the future.
Can you
when
put
I
your,
look around there.
put your hands up so we can see where you are when you
Here I am.
Yes, thank you.
You know, because we're an older group here, and it's great to see someone of his generation so active. But my question is for Sue, as someone who also has a legal background. You talked about using the institutions we have and making them work for us. So how did you reconcile, I guess, the risk of locking onto a bulldozer and losing your practicing certificate and not being able to do what you did?
Yeah. Okay, it's a very simple answer to that. I locked on to a bulldozer before I became a lawyer and got my practicing certificate. And but that said, it is really interesting. So one of the areas of work I've done a heck of a lot in New South Wales is, and there are hundreds, representing protesters who have come in contact with the criminal justice system because they have crossed that line. They've been arrested because they're trying to protect the environment. And I have represented lawyers, doctors, teachers, unemployed people, doctors of philosophy, etc. Law is one of those institutions, and it's like anything, and becoming a lawyer, the main thing lawyers are concerned with is fraud, dishonesty, drug trafficking and trading, So the idea, for me personally, my progression to law really did come from an awakening from starting way outside the system, honestly believing that all our systems are completely screwed. Because when Vinay was talking about, the dark satanic mills and where the labour movement started, etc., I grew up in the north of England. I grew up at the birthplace of the Industrial Revolution. I grew up under Margaret Thatcher, so there you go. That's probably, and I saw, or at the time, thought that those institutions, it was the institutions failing us. And then I realised, when I sat around the campfires at Chalundi and the anarchists walk in and they told me they just are there for the bloody revolution, I was the one that went to bed at night occasionally and thought to myself, and then what? And then what do we put in place of after the bloody revolution? What do we want? And I thought to myself, well, we'd want a parliament full of people that represents people. We'd want courts. And at the end of the day, I realised that these institutions are actually the institutions that we've put there for ourselves way back when, and they still work. We've just got to recalibrate them. They need to go to the local mechanic and get the complete Tesla workover. That's what we need to do.
Yeah, well, that's right. Someone needs to have a really good chat to Peter Dutton about respecting those institutions too. But I drift because I've got a vague obsession with that bloke. But to that point though, the point that you made about the New South Wales government having $5.7 billion.
Or the people of New South Wales.
The people of New South Wales. That's the joining up bit in the middle of the hula hoops. Maybe there's an opportunity for progressives, for Greens, to tell the state government what they would do precisely with that money. And to make a connection back to the urgency of climate change and Stop Adani, maybe, because Stop Adani is a fantastic campaign in the spirit of Bentley, we all know that, and hopefully it will ultimately succeed. But, okay, so you stop Adani, the question that a lot of people might ask is, well, start what? Yeah. So maybe the question then is, well, okay, if there's a war chest of 5.7 billion in New South Wales, start, I don't know, Tesla 2, for argument's sake, off the top of my head. And that's at least a pitch into the void, into the, pardon the expression, shit fight of New South Wales politics, whose status has dropped during my adult life like you wouldn't believe, like no disrespect to Gladys currently. Okay, a little bit of disrespect, but appropriate disrespect, but you know what I mean, like it's not Neville Wran who's running New South Wales anymore.
That's right.
And I think it's kind of been deliberate. Like there's been a kind of infantilisation of state politics, but now I'm preaching.
Yeah.
But seriously, the real point is, if you're going to get urgency, you've got to get people ultimately, I reckon, to be positive. So if the story now is Stop Adani and it's going to stop, well, what starts?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Hey, Vinay, you said that you think that right-wing populism has arisen because of a response to globalization. And I think that a lot of the issues that we care about as people who might gravitate more to the progressive side of politics are also responding to globalization in many ways, environmental issues clearly. But then under that banner of progressiveness, where is the space for the people who have also been affected by globalization, who are voting right-wing populist? Isn't there a space for a banner that's not just progressive, but that can also talk to those people who are a huge majority of people? And what do you think that banner could be? Could we, talk about that kind of banner?
Sure. Thanks for the question. That's a tough one, because there's a few responses I have to that. One is that I think our side of politics both sides of politics actually can really think a lot about how do we persuade the other side, where I'm a little bit of a 51%er, just a little bit, which is a bit cynical, I know, but it is how you win. And what does that mean? It means two things. It means organising your own side to have enough strength, and we haven't done that. We haven't even come close to organising our own side to have enough strength. And what's the consequence of organising your own side is you get the persuadables, right? That's the remaining 10, 15, 20%. Now, obviously I haven't given up on the other side entirely. Like, I believe in human potential, otherwise I wouldn't be a progressive. And I just think it's going to be a lot harder to bring them across. So my response to that is what underpins contemporary conservatism is fear, right? Fear is the underlying emotion. And so how do you erase fear, right? That's a complex philosophical question. Exposure to whatever it is that they're afraid of, and showing that it's nothing to be afraid of. If they're afraid of a particular ethnic group, well, then they're going to have to meet people of that ethnic group. If they're afraid of economic insecurity, well, then we're going to have to find a way to provide economic security. And partly what I'm proposing is, I actually think that's the deepest fear of all, is economic insecurity, and everything stems from that.
Oh, totally agree. I don't think the right wing has a monopoly on fear, and the whole of sort of mainstream Labor politics is directed towards the ordinary fears of ordinary people.
Hoping for a lady speaker.
I'm feeling very angry at what I read today, that the 9 protesters who were in court and found guilty of obstructing Adani are being fined $8,000 each, $72,000 in all, and Adani was fined, I think, $12,000 or something, and they're actually fighting against that. I just wonder, Sue, where you would start.
Look, it's really tragic. So, and I actually can't believe it's happening, and I feel this kind of personal guilt that I should jump on the next plane, head up to the local and just lodge an appeal. Like, that's what we do. That's what we've done here. So, when, for example, when Maules Creek coal mine, I'm sure many of you heard about that, when Whitehaven bulldozed down that ancient homeland, the Laird forest, and there was a massive outcry around that. And I saw, when I was sitting as principal solicitor at the EDO, I could see hundreds of people throwing themselves in front of bulldozers like cannon fodder, and that's what I relate to. I've always been cannon fodder. That's what you do, and you do whatever you have to in the moment of urgency to protect what matters. So I actually set up a legal service for all of those protesters. I managed to find funding, got a community lawyer, and that community lawyer, I used to fly her to every location where there was an arrest, Narrabri, Gloucester, following the coal seam gas movement. And I got that lawyer to build a whole body of expertise. We worked together to challenge these fines and and we won. We succeeded, just bit by bit, using the institution of law, as in the courts. We went to that institution, we appealed to it on the proper basis of what is just, fair and equitable, and we won. It was a long, hard fight. It involved getting money from, different sources to be able to provide that representation. But in New South Wales, in the last 10 years, the highest fine I have ever got for a protester, which was a bit of an interesting one, but was combined of 3 offences, and it was $2,000. So it was, a maximum of sort of 800, 400, and then another 600 or something like that. What's happening up there is absurd. But I would suggest that's because whatever is happening, and no disrespect whatsoever to the people on the ground trying to make it work and get up in the Adani Alliance, but I'm just not sure where the lawyers are on the ground up there, because I was on Julian Burnside, I think, did a little opinion about it, and I was trying to Facebook tag him and sort of go, hey, perhaps Julian wants to go up and represent these people and lodge an appeal. But look, maybe there is talk of appealing those fines. I don't know the actual circumstances, but I know if I was involved in that, there's no way I would be able to cop that without looking at all our avenues of appeal. So I'm hoping these people are looking at that. There's a Byron woman and her daughter, because that was in the Echo paper. So
we have an Adani spokesperson here for the district.
Right, and whether you can answer what's happening in terms of an appeal.
What we'd like to ask you, which would be absolutely fantastic, is whether you would take on the representation of these people, and whether you would then put a person who would actually come and speak to these 8 people and support them. That's my first question is, are you able to do that? And can we please speak about that? That's question 1. And Nark, your question on what is Stop Adani doing. So yes, we want to stop Adani. What comes next? In exactly the same way that Quorum grew out of Bentley. So we have right now here in the Byron Shire, the Stop Adani group looking at what is going to be our recommendation. And we're looking at a renewables project. Some of you may be familiar with what's going on in Port Augusta in South Australia at the moment, although the very sad Premier of South Australia is trying to stop it. It's a private project on solar thermal. We're trying to get a communal project, solar thermal, built around the Bowen district so that those people who are no longer going to be working in coal will actually have an alternative. It is a better alternative for them for work. It is a cheaper alternative for power for everybody else. And we're in the process of trying to pay for the feasibility study to go through to the Queensland government.
Cool.
Well done. When are the Stop Adani meetings for the district?
Liz, the Stop Adani meetings for the district are held in the Middle Pub.
Are they? Cool. All right, okay. District.
Any last question?
Another question, please.
I think last question, Liz.
We've got a gentleman outside who's pining to ask a question. We're just going to get him. But I wanted to follow through the Adani thing.
There's a hand up over there.
There's heaps of hands up.
Oh, okay.
We just get this bloke outside. He's gone.
Could I ask a quick question of Vinay? What if there was one thing you could ask everybody to do to support what you're up to, what would it be?
It's a good question. Thank you for that. We, at the moment, I want to do my part for getting this model up and running, right? I want to do my part, and so I'm looking to start this thing, right? And if we can blend with other efforts at any point, would love to. So if anyone is interested in actually helping me get this thing up and running, come talk to me, right? I think I don't know if my email address will be on the site or if there's some way. And if otherwise, that's through the central thing, right? Through building that organisation. But otherwise, what I suggest, you want to talk to each other, right? If there are different community groups out there, and you know that they've got shared interests or shared values, ask yourselves, how can we bring them together on the ground and build these hubs? How can we, even it doesn't matter what the issue is, how can we get them cooperating together, channeling resources together and becoming a progressive community hub? And lastly, I would say on that, if you're involved in that community hub level, is don't just ask yourself how can we win politically. Ask yourself about those activists and say, how can we support each other? How can we be family? right? What are their struggles, and what can we as a group do? Because that's how you truly build community, is by caring about your fellow activists and what their struggles are and helping them through that. You do that, and you'll build a powerful movement.
Okay, Liz, you got your last question there?
No, we ran away.
All right, what's it going to be?
I've been trying for ages down here.
Yeah, he
I
has.
think the lady, the general
Do you want-
running out of
As I said, do you want
It's okay, Fran. Here you go.
You make it.
Hello. Sorry, not so loud. With respect, I'm not a local, but I come here a lot. I love this town. It's fantastic. I wish I was a local. Monday night, I don't know if anybody saw Q&A. Tony Jones handed over to a professor of philosophy from Harvard, and he would have loved this tonight. He said the most important thing right now to tackle all these questions that are being brought up, and I think this is a brilliant idea, is we have to start by talking and listening to one another in community groups. We have been totally let down by our big institutions. Who trusts one of the big banks anymore? Not me. You read about all the corporate and all the shareholders every single day. If you read the corporate pages in the newspapers, the corruption level and the get what I can for myself is terrifying. Absolutely terrifying. So we have to, you're quite right, we've got 10 years, that gentleman up there, our scientist friend there, is quite right. We are really, the time for action is now, and I think this is absolutely the work you're doing and what you're suggesting is a fantastic idea. And it starts with talking to one another, listening to each other, not being, and the answer to fear is, let's get organised. So my question really is, how can we how can we support your movement and start it?
Can I just say one thing?
Yeah.
I know banks are always called institutions, but don't mistake them from the institutions of our democracy.
No, absolutely
Great.
not.
And also I just want to make a quick point related, is that even though what I'm saying might sound like, well, we need to organise almost outside of our institutions, and I am, that's not because of rejecting our institutions. Our institutions are the result of thousands of years of human development. I mean, I'm a lawyer too, and I respect that that's thousands of years of work put into it. So let's have the power to manage those institutions. So to answer your question, is how do we get this up and running? I suppose it would just be what I said earlier, is come talk to me. If you want to do it on your own, there's just as much power in if you're involved in a community group yourself, and I'm sure many of you are here, is ask who are all the other progressive groups in this area, how can we start linking them, right? And how can we build a real community of activists? And it has to, and it's tricky because, if you're thinking, well, how do we link them? You can't build an artificial or a fake link, right? It can't be a link for the sake of cooperation for its own sake. There's got to be some sort of tangible goal to the cooperation. So ideally I would say, look, our goal is to set up a progressive community hub, right? The simplest action is come talk to me, because we'll have these discussions. The Q&A was excellent because I think it's Professor Sandel, he's a communitarian philosopher, so he's right up our alley.
Thank you.
But don't forget, while we're building all of our progressive movements, remember we still have to protect the planet while we're doing it, okay?
Are we making final comments?
I think we are.
Are we? Well, could I just remind everybody of their homework? Okay, you've got to learn that verse from Treaty in Yolnu, and I'll be coming around to your houses to make sure you have learned.
One more question.
Can you sing it?
No, I'm one of the tone-deaf people you didn't care about.
Sorry.
But if I could go back to the question or the point earlier about the fines, and one of the things that always strikes me in big business, and I work for a big business, and as a director, the company then pays an insurance policy so that if I get a fine, I don't pay, the insurance company pays. When are we going to start to get a movement to get the people in big businesses, the directors, the managers, those responsible, going to prison for it instead of a fine? And that you'll start to get real changes.
It's a really interesting point, because actually a local magistrate around here about 10 years ago, there was this guy, I think it was near Grafton or somewhere further south, and he was just shooting and killing a threatened species. I think it was some kind of cormorant or some protected species. And he was shooting these birds repetitively and killing them, and the National Parks and Wildlife Office were x-rayed them and found all these bullets and all this lead, and it was, you know, carnage of this threatened species, and there was a fine, and a term of imprisonment was one of the penalties. Never, ever, ever used in New South Wales. The magistrate actually imposed a term of imprisonment, and the chap appealed and won. So that's what happens. So, but the thing with the fines for the protesters, and the thing that we didn't really talk about, is in New South Wales only 2 years ago, Mike Baird introduced really harsher penalties for environmental protesters in New South Wales. We saw, you know, fines increase by 1,000%, aggravated trespass, where the ordinary fine was $450, now it's $4,500. And again, this happened on our watch. This happened in 2015 as a result of Mike Baird stood in the dinner in Parliament House, hosted by the Minerals Council, and he promised the Minerals Council he would introduce new and harsher protester laws. He did it while we were watching, and now those laws are in place in New South Wales. The Greens spokesperson on law has said if the Greens have any power whatsoever, they would repeal those laws straight away. Adam Searle, the opposition spokesperson for New South Wales Labor, he said if he was elected at the next election, he will repeal those laws immediately. So this is happening, and we can impact that. So we can lessen fines for protesters and actually get rid of them. We can increase fines for developers, and Adani's challenging
the fines are used.
And then perhaps once we start to increase that magnitude, the expectation of environmental crime will actually start to look more like a term of imprisonment. At the moment, just remembering as well, just for us, in New South Wales, we are one of the most advanced states in the world. I know it's hard, sometimes it's hard to kind of talk about these stories, but we actually have in New South Wales a specialist court, the Land and Environment Court, which actually is a court of what we call superior record. So it's a court that's equivalent to the Supreme Court of New South Wales, and that's our highest court in our state. Barely any other, no state in this country, and barely any other country in the world has a specialist court with that level of jurisdiction. So if anybody's going to trailblaze this stuff, it actually is us here in New South Wales. We may well end up being the first place that actually takes environmental crime that seriously, because we have got this special court that actually Neville Wran delivered to us. So full circle there. So remember, we have got good institutions, but while we're watching, they're not doing what we want them to do, and we can make them do that.
To your broader point about the strength of our institutions, and on another topic, which is now current with the Royal Commission into Banking, it'll be interesting to see what comes of that, because we'll see. I mean, the processes usually are glacial, and the scandal around Storm Financial, which the CBA were implicated in, has only just seen the directors of that company banned from being directors of companies, so they haven't done any jail time. They've just had a glorified slap on the wrist, frankly. But the way Kenneth Hayne has started, Kenneth Hayne being one of the more conservative jurists in recent Australian legal history, the way he started running the Royal Commission would suggest that there will be rather more teeth than the big banks would have expected. And it's a real test for Australia and the strength of our institutions to see what comes from that Royal Commission. I think the banks will be surprised, but whether it goes far enough, who knows?
And Eddie Obeid is in jail. He did appeal. He has lost, and he's going to stay in jail. So I know, and even with the banks, like, the reality is we won't get what we want out of it. But the fact they are there now...
Which is Ian Narev in the stocks in Martin Place?
Yeah.
Is that the idea?
That's
So
right.
that's just a personal...
But you'll get out.
So, yeah.
But the fact it is happening, and that something will happen, and that there is some kind of accountability happening, means that means that something is working.
But sorry, just on that, Sue,
Yes.
because who knew if you turned banks into profit-maximising institutions that they'd start ripping people off?
Yeah,
Who knew?
Where was the vision? God. The one last thing I would just like to say that I realise I haven't at all when I talk about our institutions is, don't forget that our civil society institutions are part of that democratic framework. So we're not just talking about the parliaments and the courts, we're talking about all those really other important institutions like the ABC, absolutely, but even more so, like our community legal centres and those NGOs, and let's turn the Wilderness Society and our WWFs and our refugee. These are also civil society organisations that actually are part of the institution of civil society, that actually is what we should be resourcing and funding and empowering them. So that's our institution framework, and it is really important. I think I've said that quite a few times. Sorry.
I think Vinay said it too.
Yeah, that's right, totally. And you did. Okay. All right.
Well, we'll leave it there. I see we've had a really rapt audience tonight. Sometimes people are walking out during the questions and answers, but not tonight. So thank you, the three of you. Very inspiring. I think we all feel really like we'd like to do something to help. And thanks, Mark, our local. I hope we can get you back again.